Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Frederick County Executive Jan Gardner. And joining me as my guest today is Bruce Savos, and he serves as the chair of the Frederick County Affordable Housing Council. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here.
I could say you're a lot of other things too, so why don't you start off by telling our viewing audience a little bit about yourself and about your role on the Affordable Housing Council?
About 30 years ago, through a variety of different situations, I became involved in affordable housing. Through my work as an architect, we had worked a lot with Northern Virginia, Arlington in particular, that had a significant affordable housing crunch. And our firm happened to be at the right place at the right time, and we engaged with them and started working on affordable housing in Northern Virginia. Because of that, it kind of snowballed into Maryland and DC as well. And for the last 30 years, I realized most recently it's more become a calling and really an advocacy platform for me, working with affordable housing than just a career. But probably 90% of my career has been spent on affordable housing.
Okay, very good. Well, we recently released an affordable housing needs assessment, which I refer to as the housing study.
Right.
And it really defines the need and the demand for more workforce housing or affordable housing. Those words are somewhat interchangeable. And, you know, there were a lot of findings and some recommendations. So can you share your thoughts on the housing study and how you see that information may be used by the council and to move forward recommendations for the future?
Sure. I think it came as no surprise to everybody that the county and the city needs more affordable housing and that there is a significant housing gap from what we have to what we need. I think from the Affordable Housing Council standpoint, it gives us information and data that we can leverage in asking for perhaps new legislation, also with the community at large to educate them and let them know how important affordable housing is. I think that's something that the study shows us. It doesn't necessarily kind of get a broader perspective on the economic benefits of having diverse housing for our communities, but I think it leads us in that direction. Again, it gives us a lot of data that we can use in further discussions about affordable housing. It does talk about areas where we can look at producing more funds for affordable housing, particularly the MPDU PIL, payment in lieu of, that we will be studying and making recommendations on. So I think it was a pretty comprehensive study. There's still some areas that, as they talked about yesterday, that needs to be unpacked, which I always think is a nice term, so to speak. But I think it gives us a lot of information to move forward with in a nice framework.
Well, you know, as the county grows, and the study said this, you know, we have a growth in basically a wealthier population who can afford most of the housing that is out there that's new and being developed. But there's also this need to make sure that we can provide housing for our workforce, for the people who are working here, because we want to have that diverse economy. And we need workers of all different skill sets for all different types of jobs. So I think it's an interesting role for the council to try to educate the public on what affordable housing or workforce housing really is and what it means to our economy.
Absolutely. I think in my work with affordable housing, in particular, a couple of the projects in the city and county, when we do sort of our public engagement, it is interesting to hear people's responses to our presentations about affordable housing. And I think people don't fully realize that affordable housing is for your neighbors and the people that you work with and interact with every day. Your firefighters, your medical staff, your teachers. All that, those income levels all fall under the guise of affordable housing. It is not subsidized housing per se, but it is income restricted. And again, people get a little confused about that. But the reality is that's between about $25,000 to $30,000 to about $50,000 to $60,000, which is a majority of the interactions that we have with people every day. So I think that needs to be really clearly defined and understood.
Yeah. So it's really housing for people who are working. It's many people who are professional, have, are educated and have college degrees, but also for people who are working downtown in our restaurants and we go out to eat, or in our retail stores. And certainly we want to have people there to help us with when we go shopping and when we go out to eat. And for me as a county executive, I really want to make sure that our public servants can live here. I think it's important for our teachers to be able to live in the community that they teach in, and for our fire and public safety employees to be able to live here, because I think being part of the community is an important part of serving in that role.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that affordable housing does, that is funded by, again, the low-income housing tax credits, it wants to focus development in sort of transit-oriented locations as well. So if you want to take from maybe a 30,000-foot level as well, not only for the economic diversity, but just the general impact on our environment as well. Having affordable housing so that you can walk to work, walk to shopping, walk to services is a wonderful thing. I mean, it allows less car traffic on our streets, which we know is getting more and more as time goes on. So there's a myriad of benefits that affordable housing brings to a community, and it's something that is extremely important on the social justice side as well. Been reading a number of articles about, if you don't have a stable, affordable place to live, everything else is secondary, and that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, to me, and maybe to you, that there's pockets of, or target groups of people who are really talking about young people who can't, maybe they're single or maybe they're young families who are looking for housing and they're working here in our community. Seniors, and we know we have this growing population of seniors, and that seniors really want the same thing those millennials and young people do. They want to be close to amenities. They want it to be walkable. So I think that's very interesting that these two age groups really want the same thing. And then, of course, we have people with disabilities who also need to have housing that can meet their needs. And so we're really targeting groups of people who really want and need the same kinds of things.
Absolutely. Again, I keep referring to the low-income housing tax credits funding for affordable, but there's requirements in there to provide accessible units. There are vehicles for specific senior populations. So it provides us, again, vehicles to address some of these concerns. We know, and the senior is just a growing need, as we know, growing much faster in Frederick County than the rest of the country, in fact, which is interesting to me.
The consultant that did the housing study showed that the demographic of people age 65 and older grew 81% from 2000 to 2014, and he told me that he has not seen that duplicated anyplace else in the country that he's worked, and that's pretty surprising.
One thing that's, again, I keep referring back to the low-income housing tax credits, because that's the primary funding vehicle administered by the state but funded by the federal government that gives us funding for affordable housing. It allows a non-competitive funding to provide for senior housing, and that's something that we need to look at more, both on the Affordable Housing Council side, but also in the county and the city side. Those are credits that are awarded based on a threshold, a point scale, and that could be a vehicle for us to start providing more senior affordable housing in the county and in the city. So that's something else that we'll be talking about in the Affordable Housing Council as well.
Yeah, I think that there's a real education process for the public too about what workforce housing is, and the tax credits, people have difficulty understanding, but now that we have a few of them in the county, it becomes easier. Like the redevelopment of the apartments at the former FSK Hotel downtown, that was a tax credit project. The senior apartments in Spring Ridge on the east side of town were a tax credit project. And now 520 North Market is a tax credit project. And it really just helps to keep the cost of the project down so that the rents are lower. And that allows people to live there. So individual people aren't getting a subsidy. There's
No.
no vouchers or anything else involved. It just reduced the cost of the housing to meet the needs of the market.
Yeah, it's one of the few vehicles, and I think federal programs that works very well. The concern, though, going forward is the changes that might occur in 2017 with the change of administration, and that the tax credits might not be as attractive to the investors that fund those. So I think from the Affordable Housing Council side, we need to start exploring and talking about different ways of providing funding for affordable. We're talking about the MPDU pill, but there are other maybe ways of doing it that were discussed, some more palatable than others. But the reality is, even though maybe they're not palatable for certain groups, it will benefit all of us.
Right.
Even though those people that might have to take a little bit more in economic hit, they will benefit down the line by, again, a more diverse and economic diversity and a more vibrant community, which in turn will help them and make Frederick even a more desirable place to be.
Yes. So our time is running short already. It goes very quickly. So I do want people to know that they can get a copy of the study on the county webpage, and that there will be future recommendations coming forward from the Affordable Housing Council. But I do want to give you the opportunity to add some closing comments about what you think may be next, and maybe how people can get engaged and be involved.
Well, one thing, I want to thank you and the county government, and also the city as well. We have asked developers, why is Frederick County and Frederick City attractive for affordable housing developers? And one of the things that they say is a very supportive government. And that is paramount. You don't always get that kind of support in other jurisdictions that we work. You get a lot of NIMBYism, and you get a lot of pushback, and the county government and the city have been partners in these developments, and that, I want to say, that's a great tribute to you and the county council and the mayor and aldermen, that you don't get that everywhere, and that's something important, and it was discussed at the groundbreaking at 520. Right. Again, we have a perspective that we get to see from other jurisdictions, and Frederick is good as far as that goes.
I think that it's also, I was a commissioner for 12 years, stepped out for a little while and came back, and I think there's more community interest now and more community understanding that we're really trying to make sure there's housing that's affordable to young working people, young working families. We need them to be here to fill the jobs of all of the baby boomers who are retiring, and to really keep our community vibrant. And so we need to really make sure that our young people, our children, can live here.
Absolutely.
And so I just think there's a growing understanding in our community, and that makes it more important for the elected officials and easier for the elected officials to be engaged in that solution. So it is complex. It's certainly easier to define the problem than to solve the problem, but we'll keep making a difference and moving forward. And certainly there are good parts of the study that came out about things that we're doing well. And so, we just have to keep up with changing times.
Absolutely. And again, my final thought is that people have to understand that it affects all of us, and sort of we're all in this together.
Well, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for joining us for this conversation. If you want to know more about what the work of the Affordable Housing Council does, or to look at the information about the housing study, we have that available online, including the public presentation. So get involved, make a difference, and let's make sure everybody who wants to live here and work here can do that. Thank you for joining us.